When people talk about bold American cars of the 1960s, the usual names come up first. You hear about the Riviera, the Eldorado, the Thunderbird, maybe even the Charger or the Toronado's own stablemates at General Motors. But every once in a while a car appears that doesn't just look different from everything else on the road. It thinks differently too. And that's exactly what the 1966 Oldsmobile Toronado was. It wasn't simply another personal luxury coupe trying to ride the wave created by the four-seat Thunderbird or Buick Riviera. The Toronado was Oldsmobile's statement piece. A car that combined dramatic styling, front-wheel drive engineering, a huge V8, and enough unusual technical ideas to make it one of the most fascinating GM cars of the entire decade. The 1966 model year was the Toronado's debut, and Oldsmobile didn't exactly enter the segment quietly. In its very first year, the Toronado sold nearly 40,000 units, which is impressive when you consider what this car actually was. Expensive, unconventional, and packed with engineering that most buyers had never seen in an American luxury coupe. Oldsmobile offered two versions, the standard Toronado and the deluxe Toronado, and this particular car is a deluxe model, though not one loaded with every possible luxury option. Even in fairly modest form, the Toronado was a costly machine. The standard car started at roughly $4,600, while the deluxe version came in around $4,800, which in modern money lands somewhere in the neighborhood of $48,000 to $50,000 before options. Add air conditioning, power accessories, and a few more comfort items, and you were pushing well into the equivalent of a mid-$50,000 or even $60,000 car today. That was serious money, especially for an Oldsmobile. What made that even more interesting is that it disrupted General Motors' traditional pricing ladder. Normally, Buick was supposed to sit a little above Oldsmobile in the GM pecking order. But the Toronado complicated that. A 1966 Buick Riviera started at around $4,400, meaning a deluxe Toronado could actually cost more than Buick's glamorous personal luxury coupe. That wasn't supposed to happen in the carefully managed Sloan-era GM hierarchy, but the Toronado wasn't a car that cared much about doing things the conventional way. To understand why the Toronado exists, you have to remember the market it was born into. Ford had scored a massive success by transforming the Thunderbird into a larger, four-seat personal luxury car in 1958, and the rest of Detroit took notice. Buick answered with the Riviera in 1963, a car so stylish and elegant that it instantly became one of GM's design icons. Oldsmobile, however, wanted its own answer. Not just a copy of the Riviera, but something with enough engineering distinction to stand apart. That was fitting, because Oldsmobile had long been one of GM's technology-forward divisions. This was the brand that helped pioneer GM's early overhead valve V8 development, contributed to automatic transmission engineering, and generally liked to present itself as a little more technically adventurous than the average mid-price division. So, when the time came to create a new personal luxury coupe for 1966, Oldsmobile didn't just want style. It wanted innovation. That's exactly what the Toronado delivered. In some ways, it was part of a three-car family inside GM. The 1966 Riviera, the 1966 Toronado, and the 1967 Cadillac Eldorado all shared a common design and engineering lineage. There were shared windshield and A-pillar structures, related roof architecture, and plenty of visual relationships between them. But beneath the skin, these cars were not identical. The Riviera remained rear-wheel drive, while the Toronado and Eldorado went in a far more unusual direction, front-wheel drive. That alone made the Toronado remarkable, because this wasn't some tiny economy car or import experiment. This was a full-size V8-powered American personal luxury coupe sending all of its power through the front wheels, something almost unheard of in Detroit at the time. Stylistically, the Toronado also refused to blend in. This car has a shape that feels instantly different the moment you walk around it. The most obvious cue is the way the body swells over the rear wheels. Instead of tapering inward as it moves toward the back, the Toronado actually seems to flare outward, creating these enormous rear-wheel arches that almost look exaggerated at first glance. It's a very dramatic treatment, and it gives the car a kind of muscular elegance. Not the same kind of muscularity you'd find in a GTO or a 442, but a broader, more sculptural kind of presence. There's also a strong character line that runs down the body, tying the whole shape together, while the roofline and C-pillar flow into the rear quarters in one long, unbroken motion. The result is a car that looks low, long, and almost architectural. This particular Toronado is finished in autumn bronze, and it's easy to see why the owner calls it a favorite color for the model. In sunlight, it comes alive with this warm orange-red bronze richness that perfectly suits the car's dramatic surfacing. The interior is finished in a matching dipped color scheme, which only makes the car feel more special. It's the kind of color combination you almost never see in modern cars anymore, and it gives the Toronado a sense of occasion before you even turn the key. There are also some fascinating details in the body itself. Because the Toronado shares certain structural elements with the Riviera and Eldorado, you can spot the common GM DNA if you know where to look. The windshield, parts of the roof architecture, and the A-pillar all reveal that this was part of a larger design program. But Oldsmobile's stylists worked hard to make sure the Toronado didn't feel like a rebodied Riviera. The rear of the car is unique, especially the way the quarter panels swell outward and the body ends in a crisp, chopped-off tail. At the back, the taillights are rectangular and deeply integrated into the design, echoing the car's strong linear front-end themes. Up front, the 1966 Toronado gets one of the most dramatic noses in American car design of the decade. A long, sharp, almost predatory front clip with hidden headlights, crisp creases, and a shape that looks halfway between a luxury coupe and an industrial design study. That front end deserves its own paragraph because it's one of the Toronado's defining features. The nose stretches way out ahead of the front wheels, giving the car a huge front overhang and a dramatic, almost exotic proportion. There's a distinct W theme when viewed from above, along with what designers call a barbell effect, where the outer edges of the car feel visually heavier than the center section. The hidden headlamps, complete with little eyebrow details for 1966 only, add even more personality. This was Oldsmobile's first production car with hidden headlights, and it immediately made the Toronado feel futuristic. In 1967, the front-end treatment would change, but the 1966 model has a one-year-only face that many enthusiasts consider the most dramatic of them all. Of course, that dramatic styling came with trade-offs. The front end is full of sharp creases and pointed surfaces that would never survive modern pedestrian safety standards. Today, car noses are rounded, softened, and designed to absorb impacts in a controlled way. The Toronado comes from a very different era. An era when if a designer wanted to put a blade-like crease in the front fender or make the bumper look like a sculpted weapon, they simply did it. Aerodynamically, it probably wasn't ideal either. But visually, it's unforgettable. The Toronado also introduced some practical design changes that reflected the era's transition away from old-school features. Like the Riviera, it used flow-through ventilation rather than traditional vent windows. You can spot the ventilation outlets at the rear of the roof and package area, part of GM's attempt to modernize cabin airflow. It was clever in theory, though it also created a place for leaves, dirt, and water to collect if the drainage system wasn't kept clean. That kind of thing is part of classic car ownership. Every innovation solves one problem and creates another. Underneath the glamorous sheet metal, the Toronado gets even more interesting. The standard engine was Oldsmobile's 425 cubic inch V8, rated at 385 horsepower, and in 1966 that engine was exclusive to the Toronado. It was Oldsmobile's top power plant, and it gave the car serious performance. This wasn't a lightweight coupe, and it wasn't a muscle car in the usual sense, but it was absolutely quick for its day. Top speed was somewhere around 120 to 125 mph, and the big V8 had no trouble hauling the car with authority. The problem wasn't power, the problem was stopping. Despite its strong engine, the Toronado still used drum brakes in 1966, and they were simply not as capable as the powertrain deserved. The car weighed a lot, the brakes weren't especially large, and if you drove it hard, you'd quickly realize that the stopping power didn't quite match the go power. That mismatch between engineering, brilliance, and a few cost-cutting compromises is part of what makes the Toronado so fascinating. It's a car that feels like GM gave Oldsmobile permission to build something genuinely daring, and then occasionally reminded them that budgets still existed. The designers originally wanted more dramatic exhaust treatment at the rear, even imagining vertically oriented exhaust outlets, but cost concerns and production realities killed the idea. That kind of push and pull runs throughout the Toronado story. Wild ideas, ambitious engineering, and then the inevitable moment where the accountants step in. Step inside the 1966 Oldsmobile Toronado, and the first thing you notice is that it doesn't feel like a normal mid-1960s American coupe. Yes, it has the broad dashboard, the generous seating, and the unmistakable sense of GM luxury from the era, but there's something more distinctive going on here. The color-matched, dipped interior, finished in the same autumn bronze tone as the exterior, gives the cabin a richness that feels uniquely Toronado. The door panels, the seats, the trim, even the overall atmosphere of the interior all reinforce the sense that Oldsmobile wanted this car to feel upscale, futuristic, and just a little different from everything else in the showroom. This particular car is interesting because it's a deluxe Toronado, but not a heavily optioned one. It doesn't have air conditioning, power windows, or a power seat, which might sound surprising in a car that was this expensive when new. But in 1966, almost everything was optional, and the Toronado's price climbed quickly once you started adding comfort features. Even without those extras, though, the interior still feels special. The dashboard design is clean and dramatic, and one of the coolest features is the rotating drum speedometer, a display Oldsmobile promoted as offering instantaneous readouts. It's one of those wonderfully optimistic mid-century ideas, half practical, half futuristic gimmick, and it gives the Toronado a dashboard unlike almost anything else on the road. The Riviera used a similar setup, while the Eldorado went with a more conventional speedometer, which makes the Toronado's cluster feel even more distinctive. The steering wheel is another highlight. This car has the optional tilt telescoping wheel, a great example of 1960s GM luxury engineering. Twist the ring, move the wheel in or out, adjust it to where you want, then lock it back into place. It's a genuinely useful feature and one that feels impressively sophisticated for the era. Around it, the Toronado's interior is full of little sculptural details. The gear selector, the turn signal stalk, the trim, the switchgear. All of it designed with more flair than you'd expect from a mainstream Oldsmobile. There are also some thoughtful ventilation touches. Even without air conditioning, the Toronado still gives front passengers dedicated dash vents in addition to the lower ventilation system, which was unusual at the time. Move the controls to maximum ventilation, and airflow comes through these dash outlets as well, making the cabin feel more modern than many of its contemporaries. This was part of Oldsmobile's broader effort to make the Toronado feel advanced, and in many ways, it succeeded. But the interior also reveals one of the Toronado's biggest disappointments. It looks terrific. The seating comfort is good, the color scheme is fantastic, and the overall design is genuinely elegant. But it isn't assembled as well as you'd hope. Period road tests noticed it when the cars were new, and the problem hasn't gone away with time. The door panels and interior trim can be rattly and poorly screwed together. That's one of the most frustrating things about the Toronado. It's a car that clearly received real engineering attention in some areas, yet the interior quality control seems to have lagged behind. Compared with a Riviera or Eldorado, the Toronado can feel a little looser, a little less polished, and that's a shame because visually, it absolutely belongs in the same conversation. Still, there's a lot to love in here. The materials have a richness modern interiors often lack, and the buttons and controls have that wonderfully mechanical 1960s feel. Solid, deliberate, and satisfying to use. Even the package shelf and trim surfaces have a sheen and texture that make the cabin feel more special than a typical Oldsmobile of the period. It's the kind of interior that rewards you for slowing down and noticing details. Then there are the hidden headlights, one of the Toronado's coolest party tricks. Turn them on, and the vacuum-operated doors flip open in a wonderfully theatrical motion. It's one of those little rituals that reminds you why old luxury cars are so charming. Modern cars may be objectively better in every measurable way, but they don't give you the same sense of mechanical theater. In the Toronado, even switching on the headlights feels like part of the experience. But as interesting as the interior is, the real magic of the Toronado lies under the hood and beneath the floor. This is where Oldsmobile's engineering ambitions really reveal themselves. The Toronado was front-wheel drive, but it wasn't front-wheel drive in the way a modern sedan is. Oldsmobile had to package a big, longitudinal V8 and a heavy-duty automatic transmission in a way that could still send power to the front wheels. Their solution was one of the most fascinating driveline layouts of the era. The original 1966 Toronado came with a 425 cubic-inch V8 rated at 385 horsepower, exclusive to the model. In this particular car, however, the engine is no longer the original 425. Instead, it now has a 1970 Oldsmobile 455 service replacement block, installed back in period by the dealer rather than by some later owner scavenging parts from a junkyard. That's an important distinction, because it means the car still has a kind of factory-correct story, just not a numbers-matching one. In fact, the replacement 455 probably gives the car a little extra torque compared with the original engine, which only adds to the Toronado's effortless highway personality. Even more interesting than the engine itself is the way the Toronado's transmission works. Oldsmobile used the turbo-hydromatic 425, a special front-drive version of GM's heavy-duty automatic. The torque converter sat up front, and a massive Morse high-voltage chain transferred power to the rest of the transmission and final drive. In simple terms, Oldsmobile took the strength of a rear-drive turbo-hydromatic and adapted it into a front-drive package robust enough to handle serious V8 torque. It was an ingenious solution, and it worked so well that this same basic powertrain concept later found its way into GMC motorhomes. That alone tells you how stout the setup was. The transmission also used one of GM's more unusual features from the period, a switch-pitch torque converter with variable stator angles and 2 stall speeds. Under light throttle, it behaved one way for efficiency and smoothness. Get into the throttle harder, and it could alter the converter behavior in a way that almost felt like a downshift, even if the transmission itself hadn't changed gears yet. It was a clever piece of engineering, and exactly the sort of thing Oldsmobile loved to brag about in the 1960s. Look underneath, though, and the Toronado gets stranger still. The chassis layout is not at all what you'd expect from a big premium coupe. Instead of a full traditional frame, the Toronado uses a 3/4 frame, and the rear suspension relies on a single monoleaf spring along with an unusual 4-shock arrangement. It's one of the Toronado's oddest design choices, and not necessarily one of its best. This rear suspension setup was more commonly associated with lower-end GM products, not a car positioned as a high-dollar luxury coupe. As a result, one of the Toronado's weak spots is its ride quality. Compared with the Riviera, which rode on Buick's own chassis and used better Alpine drum brakes, the Toronado and its front-drive cousin the Eldorado simply don't ride as well. It's not terrible, but it doesn't quite deliver the floaty, composed luxury experience you might expect at this price point. So that's the Toronado in a nutshell. Brilliant in concept, fascinating in execution, and slightly compromised in ways that make it all the more human. It's full of engineering ambition, but it also carries the scars of budget decisions, platform compromises, and the realities of mass production. The brakes aren't as strong as they should be. The ride isn't quite as plush as the Riviera's. The interior can rattle more than it ought to. Yet none of that erases what makes the car special, because once you start driving it, you understand exactly why Oldsmobile was so proud of this thing. Down the road, the Toronado feels every bit like a proper big Oldsmobile. The V8 sounds rich and strong. The automatic transmission is smooth, and the whole powertrain has that classic GM combination of effortless torque and mechanical toughness. The owner points out that GM generally did engines and transmissions very well in this era, and the Toronado is a perfect example of that strength. You can hear it, feel it, and trust it. There's a sense that the drivetrain is massively overbuilt, and in many ways it was. The car moves with authority, and despite its size and complexity, it doesn't feel fragile or fussy. It feels like a machine designed to eat up miles. And then there's the view. Few 1960s American cars give you a view over the hood quite like a Toronado. That long front overhang, those dramatic fender peaks, the hidden headlights, the broad dash, it all combines into a driving experience that feels special in a way modern cars simply can't replicate. You're not just operating a vehicle. You're piloting a very specific vision of what American luxury and engineering confidence looked like in 1966. That's why the Toronado remains so compelling today. It's not the easiest classic to summarize because it refuses to fit into one category. It's not really a muscle car, though it has the engine and torque to feel muscular. It's not quite a traditional luxury coupe, because it's too weird and too engineering-heavy for that. It's not a pure design icon like a first-generation Riviera, and it's not as polished as a Cadillac Eldorado in certain areas. Instead, it exists in its own strange and wonderful lane. A front-wheel drive V8 luxury coupe from Oldsmobile, styled like nothing else on the road.